lounging, son.
All right, welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name is Ryan, and with me today, I have an awesome indie creator. I got Curtis Clow with me, who I just discovered recently with your book Beastlands that's about to come out from Dark Horse. Super stoked to have you on the channel and talk some comics, talk the project with you, dude. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So just, like I ask everybody on the channel, like, especially if it's the first time, like, how did your love for comics and the comic book medium kind of kick off?
Yeah, I was always drawn to comics growing up, but just didn't really know where to get them. And then I always knew like I wanted to make a living doing something creatively, writing stories, whether for video games or any other medium. But then like the late teens, early 20s, I just really fell in love with comics, started reading a bunch of Image stuff. Big fan of writers like Kirkman, obviously, everything he's done with Skybound. Rick Remender is a huge influence. Love all of his work, love all the high concept stuff. So I'm just a big fan of like sci-fi and fantasy, and most of the stuff I write is pretty exclusively like those two genres. So then these days, luckily, you have things like crowdfunding where you don't have to, as a writer, making comics is expensive, paying for art, paying for publishing. And that's kind of like your only way to break in. You're not just going to pitch to Marvel or DC and get a gig. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to pitch to Image and get a gig either. That's very unlikely for your first comic. So luckily with crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter, I was able to launch Kickstarter starting very small back in like 2017. And funding a few issues of my first series, and then brought Beastlands to Kickstarter back in 2019. That's where the series started. And now I've done, I think 15 Kickstarters. I have a 15th one live now for a different series. And I have a pretty good following on there, and very fortunate to have built up a fan base over the years there where stuff gets funded pretty easily. But yeah, just really thankful for the fan base and crowdfunding that's how I got my start in comics. Yeah.
That's pretty inspiring. Do you mean like you don't necessarily not everybody is going to have a successful Kickstarter, right? And just because you had one doesn't mean you'll have another one. So you have 15 all successful Kickstarters. Like successful. That's pretty fucking huge. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty dope.
Yeah, man, it's I just feel lucky. Like you have to definitely start small. Like my first Kickstarter was for a few $100s and just like 10 backers. We did like a mini print. Then a few months later came back with the first issue of my first series. And our goal was 5,000. We didn't get funded until one of the last days. And now after your backers have to trust you, and you build that trust over many launches where they know they're going to get the books from me now. They know the quality of the paper and everything I use. They know like what these stories are and the kind of writer I am. So you're just building that trust over the years. It's a very personal experience compared to like other parts of the internet, like Kickstarter. I feel like such a positive experience where you have these fans that are like diehard fans that are willing to pay extra for these books that I ship. I still do all the shipping myself.
Crazy.
It's just such a personal experience.
Yeah, I mean that's I haven't made a comic, but I've often talked about this on my channel. How I'm going to. I don't want to say I want to. I'm going to. Sometime in the future, hopefully the near future, I'm going to do a comic book, and I definitely love the fact that there is something like a Kickstarter where, obviously sometimes you have to put the money up front, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to make sure you have the book done, and that's not necessarily the case with everybody. Sometimes people have maybe a couple pages, right? Like that they were able to pay on their own. And then they have to get the funding just so they can pay the artist to do the book. And I know that some people are still skeptical because, like, you've been successful and people trust you, right? But like, there are those stories you hear where you back something, and sometimes it takes years before you get it. And that, like, to the point where like I forgot to even back that Kickstarter.
No, it's happened to me. Like I backed like some type of coffee maker, never got it, but I feel like it's less common in the comics category where these are smaller scale projects, a few $1,000s here and there for these like different goals, depending on how big the comic project is, that it's less likely you'll get burned. And if you do get burned by like a new creator, then of course, like they're not gonna have a career in comics. So you're not gonna be able to back them again. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if your project looks good enough, and as long as like you're open in the video, you're talking, this is my first project, like these are the risks, but of course, like, if you already fronted the money for the preview pages and stuff, then like, I feel like you're more likely to have people trust you.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really dope platform that creators have, where it used to be, you have to work at DC or Marvel, mm-hmm. or you have to work for a publisher. Obviously in the 80s, there were smaller publishers. A lot of people would self-publish stuff too, but like to get your stuff out there, really, like it was a very difficult thing to do. Yeah. And I think it's pretty cool that like you just, I mean, look, that's amazing. 15 to To me, that's
You
a big
know,
number,
it's crazy. Yeah,
you
no,
know?
I'm doing like 4 Kickstarters a year sometimes. It's definitely a lot of work. Sometimes these things run for like 30 days and you feel burnt out after. But yeah, to add on to what you're saying, that Kirkman manifesto back in the day, where he talked about, you use like Marvel and DC, build up your name, and then take that to create your own comics and build the stuff you love. And now, like that was only like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I think, when he said that. But now it's changed so much where I've kind of built up my name, and I haven't had to, like, of course I would take the work for Marvel and DC if they offered it, but I haven't had to go that route. Like, I've built up my name just in creator owned comics, just writing stories that I love and that I own. So it's very different than back then, for sure.
Yeah. And before we get into like your work and stuff, are you exclusively making a living now doing this, or do you still have to do like a full-time job
Yeah,
also?
no, I've been full time for almost 3 years, just making comics on Kickstarter
Awesome,
and
dude.
doing freelance writing. No, that was a dream. It was a big
That's
leap
awesome,
and
dude.
scary. For so many years, I would come home from the long, like completely unrelated blue collar day job and make comics at night, do my writing and launch Kickstarters. And then I got big enough and was able to get a little freelance writing in games and comics, web comics and stuff to make enough to have enough to live off of. That's the dream. It's still grind, but on the way there to the dream.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. Very inspiring, dude. So you have, I mean, I'm assuming you've worked with multiple artists, right? Like, how do you go about finding the right artist for the project? Like, we'll just talk about Beastlands, right? Like, how did you find Joe? How did
It's
that happen?
tough. Like it can be frustrating, like trying to find the right artist for a series. But I'm definitely very picky about who I work with. I have certain art styles in my head for, like, as I'm writing the Beastlands pitch, I know what art style I'm looking for. I wanted this like more animated look, and I think I came across Joe's art on maybe Twitter. I saw some of her comic pages. It's very important to see like sequential pages. You can't just choose an artist off of like pinups and stuff. You have to see how they actually work in comics and lay out pages. And surprisingly, she had never worked in comics, so it was just like a commission that she did for like a comic page. And I just told her about the Beastlands idea. I thought her style would be perfect, and she took a little time to think about it. I think she was working in the video game industry at the time, and then she agreed to it, luckily. And then we launched that first Beastlands Kickstarter back in 2019. And now I think she's making like her full-time living in just comics. She's done work for like Boom and stuff. I mean, obviously her work's amazing. I'm sure she has
Oh, it's
the
phenomenal.
opportunity
Yeah.
she wants. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get into Beastlands. If you could talk, I mean, obviously people have been reading it for years if they've been backing on Kickstarter, but there is going to be an entirely new fan base that will discover you and your work
Yeah.
when it gets released by Dark Horse, right? So like now you already have your set fan base, but now you're stepping into a whole new realm. So for anybody that's not familiar with the project, could you talk a little bit about the book and like what I know that I read a little bit of your backstory where you talked about like taking care of your dog and
Mhm.
in recovery, like kind of influenced your story too. So I'd love to hear, I mean, and you said also fantasy is like a huge genre for you too, but I'd love to hear the story behind Beastlands and kind of, the elevator pitch, if you will, for the book.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for this whole brand new audience. Like, it's such a different market from Kickstarter to comic shops and bookstores. But so Beastlands, I grew up in the 90s. Beastlands is very influenced from those like monster type IPs like Digimon, Pokemon and stuff, and kind of pictures like Pokemon meets Game of Thrones. But the more personal take, like I always try to put something personal and meaningful into these stories. Otherwise, it's just mindless entertainment. So it has to have like a theme and something that matters to me. And back in, I think it was like 2016, my dog was hit by a car. Very traumatic. Like, she survived, but I had to like carry her home in my arms. I thought she was dying at the time, and it just took so much like extra care for her recovery for like the next 9 months. I just like bonded with this dog so much. Like, feels like my daughter now.
Yeah.
And I tried to put that experience like into a book. That's kind of the heart of a story, is that human and pet bond and the theme of the story. And that was like what sparked Beastlands, and that's definitely woven like throughout the whole series.
And the whole like the companion beasts, like the keepers is
Yeah.
what they're called, right? Like is that kind of like to symbolize your bonding with your own dog? Is that kind of where that kind of stemmed from, or what?
Definitely, yeah. So it's I mean, obviously it's just a fun idea, is to have these like
Pretty cool, yeah.
these giant beasts that are they're kind of like real world animals with like these fantastical elements, where we're mixing up these different parts of real world animals to make it look like something fantastical, whether it's like horns and wings or big fangs. But they're about the size of like a horse. They're mountable. They have like a saddle. You can put all your gear on there. It's just like kind of more medieval world, but has a fantasy flair to it. And these beasts they could die, they could get sick, they could get hurt. Like, you have to really care for them. I wanted to be very I mean, it's definitely a mix of like medieval and fantasy, where there's not these real world, these giant creatures in real life, but they are kind of like real animals where they could get sick and such.
Okay. And when you're building out a world, because you have multiple, I mean, Wild Cosmos, slightly exaggerated, I think there's, and then you have another project as well. So when you're building out like each individual world, like for these stories, like do you map stuff out? Do you have like maps and stuff? Because like, I don't know, when I think of fantasy, I immediately think of like the map from like Lord of the Rings or whatever. I start thinking about like that kind of stuff and like the different species of orc or whatever, or troll, like you just fall down a rabbit hole with this stuff. So what does that entail when you're like starting out? What, and especially this project, how much of it did you map out before you even found Joe like to come on board with this project?
Yeah, no, I had this in my head. Many days at the day job was just brainstorming ideas for Beastlands. I mean, it depends on the project. Like every project's different. The world building can definitely be like a black hole where you just never stop and you never get onto the actual script and finding an artist. So you have to be careful to not spend too much time world building, as fun as it is. But for Beastlands, we actually did make a map. It was one of our Kickstarter rewards back in issues 4 and 5, and we like printed out this nice map. It was textured paper. I got to name everything. I was working with a cartographer closely and helping them like draw the map and stuff. Really fun and just nerding out over it. And because obviously, yeah, I'm a huge fan of fantasy, so like having my own fantasy map is just so cool. But it was fun. Like now I have like five volumes outlined for Beastlands, and now I can kind of see like their journey and know where it'll take them throughout the series. But every series is different. Like I definitely don't have a map for all my other series that are fantasy. It just depends on the series.
Okay. And like, so what are your long-term goals with Beastlands? Like, I mean, you said you have a Kickstarter live. I don't know if it is, if it's for single issues of Beastlands or what you got going with that, but with this trade paperback coming out, do you plan on continuing the Kickstarters for the single issues, or are you trying to like switch to just doing the graphic novel version?
Yeah, my Kickstarter live now is for Slightly Exaggerated. That's a different like treasure hunting fantasy series, but we've already continued the series on Kickstarter for Beastlands. Like we already kickstarted issues 6 and 7. I have them somewhere behind me in some boxes. I'm shipping out those rewards now. So that's already the start of volume 2, where it's kind of like a mix of both. Like we said, like it's such different markets where now Dark Horse is going to collect issues 1 through 5 into a trade, a nice, beautiful trade. They're going to get it out in the book market and comic shops. So we get to hit that new audience, and it's creator-owned deal. So we still have complete ownership of Beastlands, and we're going to still launch the issues so we can still hit our Kickstarter audience. I'm fulfilling issue 6 and 7 now. Next up, we'll do 8 and 9, and then 10, and that'll be volume 2. And yeah, I have like 5 volumes of outlines for Beastlands, and I think it's such a world where there's so much potential. Like I could even see like side stories, like maybe like some type of academy story there and stuff. It just depends on my co-creator Joe. Like as long as she wants to keep drawing it, then I'm down to get to volume 5 for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like, I am a huge fantasy fan, and I think that it's so limited in the market of actually getting stuff. Like at first glance, I wasn't sure. I'm like, is this YA? But then obviously there's cussing, and I'm like, okay, this definitely is not meant for a younger adult, you know? But
no, that tricks a lot of people with the art style.
Definitely did trick me. It definitely, I was shocked. I'm like, okay, what is this? Because I read a lot of the YA stuff. I think it's such a great subgenre within comic books right now, and it's fast growing, you know. But I love this type of story. I love fantasy stuff, and I don't get enough of it, you know. Like I'm kind of mad that I didn't see your stuff earlier on Kickstarter.
Oh, it's awesome. Thank you.
Because sometimes, you know, I'll scroll through the comics, but it's like I'm literally just like looking, and I get tired. You know? And then I'll go months without looking at it. And it's obviously that was probably one of the times I didn't see it. But totally. You know, I definitely, you know, the art style, the writing, I love, like the marriage of it seems really seamless. So and I think you said that English is not Joe's first language. So how do you communicate and have such a seamless fucking project coming out from the two of you when neither one of you speaks each other's first language?
Yeah, she's based out of South Korea. She's from there. We've never like spoken. We've just communicate through emails, and it was probably a lot of like translating. I mean, luckily she knows English and has learned it, and I don't know any Korean,
Yeah.
so that definitely helps out. And you have stuff like Google Translate and stuff to communicate, and I mean, I think her English must be pretty good because we're communicating pretty well through text, and I'm sending her scripts and like maybe there was like a few notes back then where I had to like change some of the thumbnails and just give her tips because it was her first comic. As good as that first issue looks, like that was her first full
That's
issue,
pretty
and
crazy.
her work's only getting better with like every issue she makes. And now obviously doing work for like Boom and stuff, like she's killing it. And I mean, nowadays we've been working together for a good number of years now, since late 2018. So like when she sends me back the thumbnails after I give her like a full script, like I rarely have to change anything. It's just like a little treat getting her art in my inbox and getting to see everything first. It's a nice little high you get as a writer.
Yeah, dude, I can only imagine what that feeling is like. Like
Mhm.
I to be able to like put somebody to put like picture to my words is something that like
Oh,
I can't wait to see, you know.
yeah, no, as a writer, that's it's like a little high, like when you get to see your panel descriptions and it comes out even better than what you had in your head. It's definitely something that like keeps you going and keep makes you like keep want to keep creating comics.
Yeah, and hold on, sorry, one second.
Yep.
One of my coworkers was trying to call me. So I'm kind of curious, like having so many successful Kickstarters, how did the Dark Horse think you would come about? How did that connection come
Yeah, I
into
mean nowadays Kickstarter used to be looked at as like a like I guess it might have been like looked down upon where people thought it wasn't as good quality and stuff. But over the years, you see people like Scott Snyder using it, Boom Studios and Keanu Reeves using it.
it? Yeah,
Like the quality's there now, and obviously indie creators like me who got our start through this, I think the quality's there now, and these publishers are realizing it where they're going to Kickstarter and looking for their new books to sign, where it's not a big risk for them. They don't have to pay for a page rate for us to make the book. Like the book's already done. They just have to redistribute it and reprint it. So I think it's a pretty low risk for that as long as the book's good. So we they contacted us back like way before the pandemic. So it's been a long deal in the making. We signed the contract back then, and they just had to wait for us to finish issues 1 through 5. And then we finally did that, and then we just needed some time for like marketing and such. So finally, almost there at the release next month. It's been a long time coming, but like it was just it sucked like not being able to talk about it. Like we signed that deal. It was finally announced like back last December, and now almost here where it's almost released.
yeah, dude. I mean, that's a pretty crazy journey. It's a long journey, but congratulations on that. I think it's huge, and it's cool to hear stories like yours because I don't often get to talk to creators that have done kind of what you've done and are now kind of making the transition into having your stuff mass produced, right? Like being able to go into any bookstore, comic book shop, and be able
Mhm.
to see it. Because so often, like when I back stuff on Kickstarter, I don't necessarily ever see that stuff in shops. It's like
Right.
not a guarantee. Like obviously, like you said, Scott Snyder, right? He did a special book for Kickstarter, and then Nocterra comes out in the shops, right? But
That's
it's
true.
not the
Yeah.
same
He
thing.
just did like the making of book. I didn't even realize that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so it's,
it is not the same thing.
but it
No,
definitely.
maybe
Go
we'll
ahead.
see more of it in the future, like with creators like me, and I have so many friends that are also doing Kickstarters, and I think these publishers are starting to realize it, where they have this low risk. Like I said, they can find good stuff on Kickstarter. They don't have to pay the page rates stuff, redistribute it. But this is the dream, dude. Like
Yeah.
getting my comic in comic shops and bookstores finally in the direct market. This is the dream. So even though you have that success, like 15 successful Kickstarters, way funding way over our goals on Kickstarter, like this is for some reason this is just way more validating, like having a publisher like Dark Horse with all this history that's been around and respected, like it's very validating.
Yeah, dude, and it definitely well deserved. I mean, I want to be able to check out your other stuff. So I'm kind of curious if like, how do we get the other books from you? Like, I know you said you have one on Kickstarter right now. Do you offer the older issues on there, or are there plans to maybe do collected editions as Kickstarters maybe in the future for this
Yeah,
other
it
stuff?
depends on my deal with these different publishers. Like the goal is always, I think my motto now is to like launch stuff on Kickstarter, always find a publisher later. Publishers have different deals, whether they'll let us like do our own like hardcover or trade Kickstarter exclusive, or they want like all the rights just for the direct market. Depends on the deal. But I'm always selling back issues on my current Kickstarters. I need to get an online store up. That's like one of my goals this year, to get somebody to run my online store where you could like buy all my back stuff. But I launched like 4 Kickstarters or so a year. year. My current one will be live until June 8th, and all the back issues for like all my other books are there. Wild Cosmos, Slightly Exaggerated, Beastlands, and my new one, Majestic. You can get the digital version on there too. This Kickstarter is for Slightly Exaggerated. It's a 4-issue miniseries. It's like a treasure hunt, whimsical adventure. On the outside, it has like flying whales, talking tree people, just all this weird stuff. We went all out with it, but on the inside, it's like a really deep story about death and finding your purpose and questioning what you've been told. It's beautiful art also by Pius Back on there.
All right, cool, man. Yeah, well, everybody listening and watching, I'm going to drop the link down to that Kickstarter below for all of you so you guys can check that out. So past Beastlands, past the other projects you're working on, is there anything else you got in the works?
Yeah, I'm doing a little freelance writing on just some work for hire gigs, helps pay the bills. And then because of this Dark Horse book and the Kickstarter success, I've had a chance to like pitch to some dream publishers. So hopefully this stuff comes out, but I'll always be on Kickstarter. Like I don't see myself ever leaving that platform. I think that'll always be a home for my stuff, but you can't beat like getting paid and working with some of my dream publishers too. So hopefully we'll see if these pitches get accepted.
All right, man. Well, I wish you nothing but the best. And before I let you go, like you kind of mentioned, some of your friends that you got on Kickstarter, they got some awesome projects. I was wondering if you could either, share some of those that you think people should check out, or maybe some other recommendations of stuff you've checked out recently that you really dig.
Yeah, the indie stuff. It's always like you said, it's hard to find sometimes. There's so many products on Kickstarter. Not all of them are of the same quality. Andrew Maxwell is a friend. He's got a book called Rum Row on Kickstarter now. Great book, great series. I've read it. Caleb Palmquist just had a Kickstarter end. He'll have a new one this summer. His stuff's always good. But if you search through, like in my Kickstarter updates, I'm always recommending projects from like friends that have stuff live and that are quality stuff that I think is worth checking out. So.
All right, cool, man. Well, like I said, thank you. At the top of the episode, thank you so much for coming to talk comics with me. And everybody listening, watching, go check out Beastlands when it comes out. Comes out June 15th, I think you said.
Yep, 15th comic shops, 28th in Amazon and bookstores. But yeah, if you can get it at a comic shop, of course, that's always the preference.
All right, cool, man. And then for everybody listening and watching, can you share where they can find you online, like all your social media links? And I'm going to drop those down below for you as well.
Yeah, I'm at Curtis Clow on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
All right, cool, man. Well, again, thank you. Congrats on the deal with Dark Horse. Excited to see what else you got in the works. And next time you have a project you want to promote, definitely hit me up and we'll get you back on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you again for having me on.
Of course, man. Thanks.